All right, good morning. I moved the 67 out of the way this morning because I got another little project going on that I wanted to take care of while the weather was nice today. It's supposed to be crappy the rest of the weekend. This belongs to a friend of mine. His name is Wally, obviously. 55 Chevy Bel Air, two-door post. Beautiful, beautiful little car. I mean, I'll tell you what, this thing is super clean. Very, very well done. I mean, look at that. Just, oh God. This thing has power steering, power brakes. It drives like a new car. It's crazy. My first car was a 56 Chevy wagon, two-door, that, I restored, started working on when I was 15. Some of you may know. Fun project, great car. Had a lot of fun in that thing. But it didn't drive. That had all drum brakes, manual steering, everything this is not. And it's unbelievable how the other half lived. This thing just drives so different. But let me show you what I'm into here. So Wally has installed a Sniper 2GC carburetor, fuel injection, throttle body injection, with a Holley Hyperspark distributor setup. It is a really nice little setup, and I've looked around. I have not found much online with this. This is actually a 350 Volvo Pinta boat motor, believe it or not. Of course, it doesn't have all the smog attachments and everything else, so for a car like this, it's an ideal fit. Great running little motor, or at least it was. He's got a vintage air kit in it. Just a sweet ride, man. This thing is really good. So what he's asked me to look at was, he put in the throttle body and the Hyperspark, and it ran pretty good for a little while. Then it just went to shit. Loads up, popping, banging, spitting, sputtering. And I've kind of debugged it a little bit, and I'll show you some of the footage on that now. I got a cable to attach in place of the handheld, hooked my computer up to it, was able to monitor all the signals. And what you see is something very interesting with the O2 sensors. I think what had happened was this was just running way too rich, and it fouled the O2 sensor. I kept messing with it, and it would run great for a few minutes on a good tune. I put it only had the factory tune. I mean, the box tune from Holley in there, and it was okay, but it was rich. So I messed with the tune, got it running really good, and it would run good for a few minutes until that O2 sensor heated up, and then it was gone. Just start crapping out again. So what I'm going to do is, Wally's got a couple of new O2 sensors. It only uses one, so I'm only going to replace the one that is bad. But the interesting thing about this is how it failed on the display, and I have not been able to find much about this. So I want to take a break right now and take a few minutes and show you what that's doing on the computer, so you can see the signal I saw and what led me to understand what was actually going on. Okay, so this is the data log that I was looking at when I discovered where we were running into trouble. So this is, you can see here, this is where the engine starts. The purple is the air-fuel ratio as measured by the O2 sensor. The blue is the target, okay? And as I started it up, the engine was already fairly warm, like 211. You can see here as it started up, the pump kicked in and started to cool a little bit. But as it heated up, the AFR here is hunting, it's closed loop. It's working to stay close to that target. I keep doing that. Anyway,
as I went along, everything seemed okay. Seemed to be working. AFR is getting a little fruity here as I was working the throttle a little bit in the garage. And then as it warmed up, it did this. And here you see it, the AFR just takes off. And then eventually hits this this 35.6 value. Now 35.6 is a good indication that your O2 sensor is failed. That's where it tops out. So either the sensor failed or it's getting so much air in the exhaust that your sensor's telling you something here. So I pulled the sensor out, found it was completely sooted up, replaced it, and got a much better result. But the cause of the failure was still the rich condition that we've been fighting all along. So, the next step was to figure out why is this thing running so rich? It seemed to be running down here at your 14.7. Everything seemed pretty good, and at least trying to hunt it out. But as soon as I started playing with the throttle a little bit, it got warmer, and as soon as it did, it just took off. It just headed for the buckwheat. So, and as soon as it took off, it comes out of closed loop mode at that point, as you can see here. But at that point, there's just no telling what you're getting, and it's just flooding. It just starts to really flood the system with fuel, and it stumbles, and it just runs really, really poor after that. So if you see that 35.6, that is a good indication that you've got something really wrong with your O2 sensor. So that was kind of the missing link for me. When I figured that out, I got to a point where something was really wrong here.
Okay, that said, I'm going to put this up on the lift. I am going to swap out that O2 sensor. One other thing we did, it had a 160 thermostat in it. We put in a 195 just because, a lot of the tuning values, you set it up so that it starts to tune after 160. Well, if the thermostat's sitting at 160, it can give you some funky results. So my recommendation, we couldn't get a 185. We tried, but my recommendation would be running 185 in it for if you're running a sniper setup. It has its own sensor here for water temp, and then there's a sensor in the block down there. Interestingly enough, one thing I noticed with this car, and I can't say that I've ever seen it, but I can't say that I've ever had two water temperature sensors on the same car, but the head temp comes way up, but long before the water temp rises up by the gooseneck. So, you see it shoot up to 220, 230 on the head before the 195. It hits 195 up here and the thermostat opens. Once the thermostat opens, everything evens up, and it's very consistent. But that kind of surprised me a little bit. I wasn't really expecting that to be so different from point to point. I don't know why, because that's right down near, that's where the action's happening, right? That's direct heat. So, should be good. A super nice radiator. Look how clean this thing is. And a little 9-inch booster on there. Dual electric fans. This thing runs right on the thermostat all the time. It's just a beautiful little car. He did such a nice job with this. But all right, so next step, I'm going to roll it in here, get it up on the lift, get that O2 sensor swapped out, get it running, check it on the computer, make sure that one's not doing something funky. Try to lean this thing out just a little bit. All the plugs were very, very dark. Hoping that we can get it to lean out just a hair so that doesn't happen regularly. If we can get it to run right, get it back over to him, let him run it for a bit more. It's, you gotta, with these snipers, especially the 2GC, I'm learning, you got to kind of set up your curves, get everything where you want it, run it, let it learn a little bit. But the key to letting it learn is then you have to transfer that learning table over to your base air fuel mixture table. And if it doesn't do anything unless you transfer it over and then merge the two tables. So I'll do that. I'll drive it around a little bit, maybe take it out for a little ride today, and then come back to it, do the learnings again, let Wally run it for a little while, have him come back over, and we'll transfer the learnings one more time and check some plugs. And Wally's obviously knows what the hell he's doing on the end of a wrench. So, have him check the plugs periodically, make sure that, it's running really super rich right now, but you got to go small steps. I don't want to lean this thing out because that'll be worse. Rich mixtures are easy to deal with. Lean mixtures get expensive in a hurry. So that's where we're at. I'm going to pull that in. I'm going to throw it up on the lift, change out that O2 sensor. I'm going to carefully inspect it, though. Just make sure I don't have a burnt wire. That's the other thing that worries me, just kind of the way the O2 sensor looks like it works really well for a while, and it's tracking and it's adjusting fuel mixtures and air fuel mixtures, and everything looks good. And then all of a sudden, the O2 sensor heads for the buckwheat. It goes right to 35.6 volts and sits there. And it's normally, running not 35.6 volts. It goes to 35.6% air to fuel ratio, which would indicate a super lean condition. So the Sniper's constantly dumping more fuel in, trying to compensate for that, and just making it worse. So when it shows an air fuel ratio of 35.6, I've also seen it have it set online that it was 35.1 when the O2 shits the bed, but that's kind of where it wants to reside. So, like I said, I'm going to pull this in, check it out, see what I can do about it, work it a little bit, and then take it for a ride. Put it on the computer, see what I get.
So when I got it on the lift, I pulled the plugs and replaced them. I noticed some of them were very sooty, and some of them looked extremely washed, just supporting the very, very rich theory. But what I also noticed underneath was there were some joints on the exhaust that were not welded properly and were obvious source of leaks. So I took some time, dropped the exhaust down. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But these potential leaks were right forward of the O2 sensor. So in theory, what was happening is as this thing was starting to leak, it would show the O2 sensor an extremely lean situation, which caused the Sniper to just dump more fuel. And the more fuel, obviously, it just got richer, and it was a vicious circle that was out of control. It was a closed loop, but it was feeding off from bad information. So that's where we started working next.
Okay, so what we decided to do, I just unhooked the bells here, and we're going to weld that up. That opening, you can see that was open there, and actually it doesn't even go back a 1/4 inch beyond the end of those slits, so pretty confident I got a leak there. So let's see if I can make this look better for you here. So we dropped it down. Sorry about that. Yeah, we dropped it down, took the gaskets out, although they weren't really gaskets. They were, I don't know, some aluminum plate. I got to figure that out. Anyway, dropped it down, gonna weld up those potential leaks. The bungs look welded in beautifully, so I don't see a problem there, but I just took some wire brush, cleaned this up. You can see this wasn't welded for about 1.5 inches up here, so pretty confident that's leaking. I put an exhaust clamp on it and tried it. It was better, but still not quite there. So I figure while we're here, let's sort this out.
Okay, so this is where I ended up. I reached out to my buddy at Rusted Up Garage, check him out, Ricky, and his son Zach. Zach and I connected on this, and Zach really helped me out here. He helped me understand a few basic things. I was really wrapped around the axle on the target AFR number, and he helped me understand that the number is just a number. I was like, oh, I can't go above 14.7, can't go above the, it's really not like that. It's that number is a direct reflection of how your system is reading that O2 sensor. So, every system is going to be slightly different. So don't get wrapped around the axle on the actual number. And what Zach told me made total sense, and it's exactly what I ended up doing. Just slowly bump these numbers up, a couple points at a time until you start to notice an ill effect. The motor starts to stumble. It starts to just idle poorly and not run. Just like you were constantly adjusting jets in an old carburetor, just slowly bump these numbers up until you start to notice some ill effects, then bring it back down until it's happy. And then you're pretty much there. So I did that, and I ended up with some, it really wasn't as high as I thought it was going to be. If I got much above 15, it kind of went sideways and started to rumble and then rumbling, bumbling, stumbling going down the road. So I brought it back down a little bit. If anything, I might be still a hair rich down in the 900 to 1500 range on this. The thing about this car is it has an overdrive transmission, and that overdrive transmission, it tends to idle along at like 1,000 RPM, at cruising. So you got to pay attention to that. If you have a motor that's running at a decent RPM through at the cruise range, you have a lot more flexibility. I mean, these motors were never meant to make horsepower below 1,000 RPM, right? I mean, they're really just, set to start kicking in at that point. So anyway, this is where I ended up. It's a little leaner than you would expect if you're just looking at the numbers, but this is where it ran good. The other thing that and I can show you the graph on this. This is what the graph looks like. It could be a little smoother, and I probably will smooth that out at some point, but right now I've got it reacting and running pretty much like I want it. The timing on this motor was interesting as well. This motor called for an 8 degrees advance at idle up to a maximum of 30. And that was pretty much a function of the camshaft. Remember, this was originally a Volvo Penta motor, and it had the heads redone, put back on, and it runs great. It makes great horsepower in the power band. If anything here as well, I would, after running it for a few days and after he gets it smoothed out, I might go, knock that 8 down to just 1,000, and at the 1250 number here, take that and start to build it up there. I don't know if I need to 30 degrees advance at 3,000. I might move that down a little bit too. I might shift this whole thing down just a hair to get it quicker into the power band. If I did find that if I went much above 30, 32, 33, I started to get a lot of pinging and spark knocking. So I stopped and went right back to this because that's not going to help anybody either. This is what the timing table ended up looking like. Again, I got that funky little peak in here I could take out, but other than that, it's pretty smooth. Again, I'm not 100% convinced I like where it starts taking off, but I liked where it ended up because at the higher RPMs, the power band felt great. Now, here's the fuel graph. This still has some peaks in it, but this was after a couple of learning sessions, and that's what the fuel graph ultimately ended up looking like. So, not unexpected. When I do bring in the learnings, I don't smooth it because I like to see exactly what it's doing and where it's struggling. You know, the law of averages says it's going to smooth itself out anyway because it's never going to sit right on those points. It's going to get to those points and come off those points. So those peaks. So it'll work out. So ultimately, I put this in the car, started messing with it, changing timing a little bit, letting it learn, did a few learn cycles on it, kept integrating the learn feature. One thing I struggled with for a little bit is, you get your learn table here. This was just sitting in the garage, so I disregarded that. But you have to be offline to transfer to learning to base, and then you have to resync it to get it to take. So in other words, you can't just transfer the learning to the base while it's connected and running. You can't transfer that to the live table. You have to go offline, transfer to base, go back online, and send it to the ECU. That wasn't really, if you're working dynamically with a laptop in the car, that's where it ultimately ended up. But to make a very, very long story, just a little bit longer, after doing all this, getting some road time on it, getting a few learn cycles into it, it cleaned right up nice. I don't particularly love the way it runs in overdrive, but if you put it in third gear and run it, give it a cup, 1,500, 1,600 RPM, it runs super nice. It cruise. So, it's one of those things. It has a GM 700 transmission in it with a shift kit. But I definitely believe that the overdrive doesn't help this. I'm not tuned well for overdrive right now, is how I would like to put it. I think it runs fine at overdrive. It would go down the highway beautifully at 70, 80 miles an hour, I'm sure. But by the time you put it down in overdrive and you're going down the road at 40 to 50 miles an hour, it's a little logy still. But we'll let it learn for a few days. I've told the owner he's got to religiously check those spark plugs because I don't know. I'm hoping if it's still too rich, then we got to take it down a little bit more. If it's too lean, then we got to catch that early. So that's the key takeaway here. But basically, the target ratio was one of the key things. I kept bumping that up a couple points at a time. 0.2 plus 0.2, smoothed it out plus 0.2, and got it to a point where it started to run a little rough, and you could, even just idling in the garage, you could tell it was starting to get a little too fat. Brought it down a few points till it smoothed out again, and that's fairly dynamic. You can do that on the fly right in the garage. So, you select your points, you left click and just say offset selected, and you can go plus 0.2, minus 0.2, and you can poke around a little bit like that, and it worked great. So this is my first time tuning one of these. I have never done this before. I am definitely a proponent of this system. It works so nice once you get it running right. It works good. But one thing I will say as a closing comment, getting this thing right really gives you a lot of respect for those engineers that originally built the 2GCs, because all of this is factored in to that mechanical carburetor. Between the accelerator pump, the jets, the cam on the accelerator pump, everything had to work in unison to make it perfect. And those things were bulletproof. I mean, those little 2GCs ran great. And, they weren't making tons of horsepower, but for a clean little carburetor that was super simple, and when you figure in it had all these factors involved with getting the air ratios right, impressive. And, these were all done before CAD. I mean, these were guys at drafting tables, right? So hats off to the old school carburetor designers, that's for sure. So anyway, thank you, and I'm going to wrap this up.